The soft afternoon sunlight streamed into the living room of Judith Watson's new home. As she watered the houseplants by the window, she glanced at the clock. It was almost time for Amy to return from school. It had been 2 years since her remarriage. Judith was gradually getting used to her new family arrangement with her husband Mark and her 12-year-old stepdaughter Amy. Before marriage, she had worked as a nurse at a hospital, but now she focused on community volunteer work. The reading program she ran for children was her particular pride. The sound of the front door opening was followed by Amy's voice saying, "I'm home." "Welcome back, Amy. How was school today?" Judith came out of the living room and took Amy's school bag. "It was okay, I guess," Amy replied with a slight shrug. She was tall, with long brown hair and large blue eyes inherited from her late mother. She was a smart and kind child, but she had become more introverted since losing her mother to illness 4 years ago. "What about homework? Your father will be late today, so shall we finish it while making dinner together?" Amy nodded and headed toward her room. Judith watched her go and smiled. Though their relationship had improved significantly since the beginning, Amy still hadn't completely opened up to her. Mark Watson was the vice president of a real estate development company and a dedicated professional. After losing his beloved wife, he had managed to raise his only daughter while maintaining his career. He met Judith at a charity event at Oak Ridge Academy, the school Amy attended. Oak Ridge Academy was the most prestigious private school in this affluent suburban area. Amy attended on a scholarship, and recently she had begun spending time with a new friend, Caitlin Morrison. Caitlin Morrison was a prominent figure at school, and her mother Carol was a member of the school board with considerable influence in the community. The Morrisons were an established family in the area, and Carol's husband was a partner at a major law firm. While preparing dinner, Judith asked Amy about school. "How are things going with Caitlin?" she asked while chopping vegetables. "Fine. She's really popular. Since she chose me as her friend, everyone started talking to me too," Amy replied, looking up from her math homework. "That's wonderful. Do you have any plans for the weekend?" "Caitlin invited me to her house on Saturday." "Is that okay, Mom?" Judith smiled. "Of course. I'll call Carol to get the details." Mark returned home just as dinner was almost ready. He looked tired, but his face brightened when he saw Amy. "How was your day, Princess?" He placed a light kiss on Amy's head. "I told you not to call me Princess anymore." "I'm not a child," Amy protested with reddening cheeks, though her eyes were smiling. During dinner, Mark talked about his new project, and Judith shared events from her volunteer work. Amy occasionally joined the conversation but mostly listened quietly. After dinner, Amy went to take a shower, and Judith and Mark relaxed on the sofa with glasses of wine. "Don't you think she's become a bit brighter lately?" Judith asked softly. Mark nodded. "Yes, it's good that she's made a friend in Caitlin. She used to spend a lot of time alone. Carol Morrison seems a bit difficult to approach, but it's good that the children are getting along. The Morrisons are influential in the community. Having a good relationship with that family wouldn't be bad for Amy," Mark said from a practical perspective. Judith frowned slightly. "Is that what matters? Isn't it more important that Amy finds real friends?" Mark took her hand. "Of course it is. But realistically speaking, having good connections will help her in the future." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Amy coming down the stairs. She was already in her pajamas, holding a book. "I have to present in literature class tomorrow. Will you let me practice?" she asked, looking somewhat nervous. "Of course. What book is it?" Judith made space beside her on the sofa. "The Secret Garden." "It was my real mother's favorite book," Amy said awkwardly. Judith felt a small pang in her heart but didn't show it. "It's a lovely book. I read it when I was a child too." "Go ahead, let me hear you. Amy began to read, and her voice gained confidence with each page. Mark watched his daughter proudly, and Judith smiled gently. In this moment, they felt that even if they weren't perfect, they were certainly becoming a family. When the living room clock struck 9, Amy yawned. Time for bed, Judith said gently. Amy nodded and stood up. Good night, Dad, she hugged Mark. Good night, Princess. Amy, Mark corrected himself with a laugh. Amy turned to Judith. After a moment's hesitation, she said, Good night, Judith. She wasn't ready to call her Mom yet, but Judith understood. Some things take time. Good night, Amy. Sweet dreams. As she watched Amy go up the stairs, Judith found herself gradually but surely feeling hopeful about their new family arrangement. Thursday afternoon, Judith was preparing dinner in the kitchen. The aroma of chicken soup filled the room, and the setting sun cast a warm light through the window. The sound of the front door opening was followed by Amy's voice saying, I'm home. Her voice sounded a bit less energetic than usual. Welcome back, Amy, Judith came into the living room, wiping her hands. How was school? Amy placed her backpack on the sofa and sat down with a slightly tired expression. It was okay, I guess. Judith grew concerned seeing her demeanor. Did something happen? Amy shook her head. No, it's just. She paused, rubbing her eye with one hand. Mom, my eyes feel strange. Judith knelt in front of Amy and examined her face. Amy's eyes were slightly red, but there was no obvious abnormality. How do they feel? Do they hurt? They don't hurt, but they feel prickly. And my vision is a bit blurry, Amy rubbed her eyes again. Judith gently took Amy's hands, saying, Don't rub them too much. It will only irritate them more. It was spring, and pollen was in the air. It might be allergies. Have you had any runny nose or sneezing lately? Amy tilted her head thoughtfully. No, not really. I see. But don't worry. There's a lot of pollen this time of year, so your eyes might be sensitive because of that, Judith gently stroked Amy's hair. I'll give you some eye drops after dinner. Amy nodded and asked, Caitlin said I could come over to her house tomorrow. Mom, can I go? Judith smiled. Of course. I'll check with Carol. That night, Amy went to bed early. Judith applied mild eye drops and assured her she would feel better tomorrow. However, after Amy was asleep and Mark returned home, she confided her concerns. I'm worried about Amy's eyes. I think it's just allergies, but... Mark shrugged. It's spring. I sneezed several times during meetings today. If it continues tomorrow, we can take her to the pediatrician this weekend. Judith nodded, but she felt something was off. Friday after school, Amy went to Caitlin's house as planned. Judith had a work conference call, so she asked Mark to drop Amy off. I'll pick you up at 6, Judith told Amy. How are your eyes feeling? They're fine, I hardly notice them now, Amy replied, though she was still occasionally rubbing them. At 6 p.m., Judith parked in front of the Morrisons' luxurious mansion. She had exchanged brief conversations with Carol at the doorstep a few times during drop-offs and pickups, but this was her first time entering the house. After ringing the doorbell, a maid promptly answered and led her inside. The spacious entrance hall was decorated with expensive-looking paintings, and the marble floor echoed with footsteps. Madam is waiting for you in the library, the maid said politely, leading Judith. Carol Morrison was a sophisticated woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing an expensive cashmere sweater. She rose from the sofa and greeted Judith with a formal smile. Judith, welcome. Please have some tea, she indicated teacups that were already set out. Thank you, Carol. Where is Amy? Judith looked around. She's upstairs with Caitlin. I'll call them right away, Carol said, but at that moment, footsteps were heard coming down the stairs. Caitlin appeared, followed by Amy. Caitlin had the same blonde hair as her mother and walked with confident bearing. "Hello, Caitlin," Judith smiled. "Amy, did you have fun?" Before Amy could answer, Carol suddenly walked toward her and peered at her face. "Amy, your eyes." She cut herself off, looking at Judith. "Mrs. Watson, look at this." Carol took a penlight from her pocket and shined it in Amy's eyes. Judith approached, surprised. "What is it?" she asked. Carol's face paled. "This is not normal." Her voice dropped to a whisper and contained a coldness. Amy clutched Judith's hand with a frightened expression. "Mom, my eyes." Her voice trembled. Judith came to her senses and looked at Amy's eyes. Indeed, there were small red spots scattered in the whites of her eyes. As a healthcare professional, she recognized it as a type of subconjunctival hemorrhage. "Amy, it's okay," she said in a calm voice. "It's just a small hemorrhage. We'll have a doctor look at it." However, Carol stood between them with a cold expression. "Mrs. Watson, this may not be just a hemorrhage," her voice held an accusatory tone. Hemorrhages can be signs of certain kinds of abuse." Judith felt as if she had been struck by the words. "What did you say?" "When strong pressure is applied to a child's neck or face, such symptoms can appear," Carol continued in a severe tone. "I've also heard that Amy's behavior at school has been unusual lately." "Wait a minute," Judith said, restraining her anger. "What are you saying?" "There is no abuse in our family." Carol smiled coldly. "Of course, that's what you would say. However, as a school board member and a parent, I have a duty to report such signs. I will contact the school and child protective services on Monday." Amy stood frozen with fear. "Mom," she called in a small voice. Judith put her arm around Amy's shoulders and said, "Let's go, Amy." She turned back to Carol and stated, "This is a misunderstanding. If something has happened to Amy, we'll have her examined by a doctor. Your assumptions are wrong." Carol maintained her cold expression, replying, "That will be for the authorities to decide." Judith and Amy hurriedly left the house. In the car, Amy began to cry. "Mom, I didn't do anything. Why would she say such things?" Judith pulled the car over and embraced Amy. "It's okay, Amy. You've done nothing wrong. We'll uncover the truth." When they arrived home, Amy immediately ran to her room. Judith called Mark and explained the situation. He promised to come home right away. That night, Amy came to Judith's bed crying. "Mom, please, I don't want to go to school," she said in a shaking voice. Judith hugged her and promised, "It's okay, I'll protect you." But inside, a storm was brewing. Why would Carol do this? And most importantly, what was causing Amy's eye condition? Monday morning, Judith and Mark received Natalie Jenkins, a child protective services investigator, in their living room. She had a clipboard in hand and a serious expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Watson, thank you for your time today," Natalie said in an official tone. "I've been contacted by the school to investigate Amy's situation." Mark sat nervously on the edge of his chair and immediately said, "This is a misunderstanding. We have never hurt Amy." Natalie nodded calmly. "Please understand that such allegations must be taken seriously. First, I'd like to see your home situation and speak with Amy individually." For the next 2 hours, the investigator examined every room in the house, took photographs, and made notes. Then she went to Amy's room to speak with her alone. Judith and Mark waited in the living room in a silence mixed with anxiety and anger. "I can't believe it," Mark finally said quietly. "What is Carol Morrison thinking?" The sound of Natalie coming down the stairs made them both stand up. Her expression was enigmatic. Based on my investigation, I found no direct evidence of abuse, she said. However, I've also received reports from the school about Amy's unusual behavior. Apparently, she has become more withdrawn and spends more time alone during breaks over the past few weeks. She's always been somewhat introverted, Judith explained. After losing her mother. I understand, Natalie interrupted. However, combined with the eye symptoms, there may be some stress factors at work. I'd like to visit again in a week to check on the situation. After the investigator left, Judith went to Amy's room. Amy was sitting on her bed, staring expressionlessly out the window. Amy, Judith called gently. Has something been happening at school? Amy shook her head silently. Judith sat on the edge of the bed and said, "We're on your side, Amy. No matter what happens, we'll protect you." After a long silence, Amy finally began to speak in a small voice. "Caitlin and her friends, they've been bullying me." Judith gasped. Bullying? What kind? Tears fell from Amy's eyes. It started with small things. Hiding my pencil case, making fun of my hairstyle. But recently? Recently? Judith gently prompted. After gym class, in the locker room, they surrounded me. Amy continued in a trembling voice. They pushed my head against a locker and said, "Don't get cocky, you're just a transfer student." And that day at Caitlin's house, she tried to force me to tell family secrets. Judith's chest filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. She hugged Amy and asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" "I thought it would get worse if I said anything." Amy sobbed. "And I was looking forward to going to Caitlin's house, such a luxurious home that everyone envies." Judith gently stroked Amy's head and said, "Take today off. Tomorrow, I'll go to school and talk to your teacher." The next morning, Judith met with Amy's homeroom teacher, Daniel Collins. Collins was a popular teacher. "Mrs. Watson, thank you for coming in," Collins greeted her in the classroom. "I understand you're concerned about Amy." "My daughter is being bullied," Judith said directly. "By Caitlin Morrison and her friends." Collins' expression tightened momentarily. "Bullying? In my class, such things." He seemed to be choosing his words. Could it just be minor disagreements between children? Disagreements? Judith said with an incredulous expression. She had her head pushed against a locker. "That's what caused the eye hemorrhage." "I'm very sorry, but," Collins interrupted her. "Amy is a child with a vivid imagination, so she might be exaggerating the situation. Besides, the Morrison girl is an exemplary student." Judith felt her body trembling with anger. "Are you saying my daughter is lying?" "That's not what Collins faltered. "I just think we need to look at the situation from all perspectives." "I understand," Judith said coldly. "If the school won't take this issue seriously, we'll consider other options." On her way home, Judith gripped the steering wheel tightly. She began to feel distrustful of the school's response and started wondering about the meaning behind Carol Morrison's allegations of abuse. Was this just a coincidence, or? When she arrived home, Mark was working from home. She explained the situation, and she saw his face redden with anger. "We can't let others hurt our family anymore," Mark said with determination. "Let's uncover the truth together." That night, they talked late into the night, planning how to resolve the situation. Tomorrow, they would begin their own investigation. Wednesday afternoon, Judith parked in front of Oak Ridge Academy's main gate. It was the after-school pickup time, and many parents had come to meet their children. She had deliberately chosen this time. Amy was still absent today. Mark had taken her to a pediatric ophthalmologist, who diagnosed subconjunctival hemorrhage and confirmed it was caused by some form of trauma. The doctor's certificate would be important evidence going forward. Judith got out of the car and observed the children coming out one after another. She matched faces with names she had researched in advance, looking for her target. Mrs. Lisa Jones, she approached a petite woman. I'm Amy Watson's mother. Could we talk for a moment? Lisa Jones showed a surprised expression but quickly indicated understanding. Of course. I know you're concerned about your daughter. My daughter Olivia is in the same class. The two began their conversation at a nearby cafe. Lisa looked around several times and spoke in a hushed voice. To be honest, many children are afraid of Caitlin's group. Especially new transfer students or those from less affluent families tend to be targeted. So there are other victims, Judith confirmed. Lisa nodded. Last year, an Asian transfer student was severely bullied and eventually transferred to another school. The school tried to cover everything up to avoid publicity. Why doesn't anyone stand up? Judith couldn't contain her indignation. Lisa gave a bitter smile. Carol Morrison is one of the school's biggest sponsors and has a strong voice on the board. Many parents fear that if they go against her, their children will be disadvantaged at school. That day, Judith met with 3 other parents and heard similar stories. Not just Amy, but multiple children had experienced various forms of bullying from Caitlin and her group. In the evening, when Mark returned home, Judith shared the information she had gathered. It wasn't just our problem. This is systematic bullying, and the school is turning a blind eye. Mark frowned. But why did Carol counter with allegations of abuse? I have an idea, Judith said. There's another parent I plan to meet tomorrow. She might know something. The next day, Judith met with Bethany, the mother of Amy's classmate Zach Miller. Bethany was a former teacher at Oak Ridge who had resigned a year ago. The relationship between Mr. Collins and Carol Morrison was a subject of rumor within the school, Bethany spoke quietly. They were sitting face to face in Bethany's kitchen. Many teachers noticed their unusually intimate relationship. But no one made it public. You mean they were having an affair? Judith asked in surprise. Bethany nodded. Carol had a great influence over Collins, forcing him to turn a blind eye to anything related to her daughter. When I tried to report this to the principal, Carol spread various rumors to damage my reputation, and I eventually had to resign. Judith felt all the pieces starting to connect. So when Amy's eye symptoms appeared, she preemptively accused us of abuse. She's a woman who will stop at nothing to protect her daughter, Bethany warned. If you're going to confront her directly, you should gather solid evidence. With these words in mind, Judith and Mark planned their next move. First, they gently persuaded Amy to record the details of the bullying. Amy was scared at first, but feeling her parents' support, she gradually began to tell everything. The incident in the locker room was the direct cause of her eye symptoms. Caitlin and 2 of her friends surrounded her and pushed her face against a locker door. With the words, "Don't think a poor kid like you can be friends with us." Also, according to what a boy had heard, Caitlin had told her mother that she wanted to get Amy kicked out of school. Having gathered all the information and obtained the doctor's certificate, Judith and Mark demanded a meeting with Principal Hamilton, the school's highest authority. Initially rejected by the secretary, they were quickly given an appointment when Mark hinted that his real estate company was involved in bidding for the construction of the school's new building. Friday morning, the two entered Principal Hamilton's office. Principal Hamilton was a dignified woman in her 60s who had been in education for over 30 years. "Mr. and Mrs. Watson, thank you for coming in," she said formally. "Is there something concerning your daughter?" "Yes, we are very concerned," Mark replied calmly. "Our daughter is experiencing serious bullying at this school, yet the school has not taken appropriate action." Principal Hamilton frowned. "I heard from Mr. Collins that it was just a quarrel between students." "This is not a quarrel," Judith said in a stern voice, placing a folder with photographs on the desk. "This is a traumatic subconjunctival hemorrhage diagnosed by a doctor. And these are testimonials from parents of other victims. She continued to produce more documents. Here is the testimony of former teacher Bethany Miller. It details the inappropriate relationship between Mr. Collins and Mrs. Carol Morrison, and how they covered up the bullying. Principal Hamilton's complexion changed. These allegations are very serious. An investigation will be necessary. Of course, please investigate, Mark said. However, if the school does not respond appropriately, we are considering providing this evidence to the media. Judith continued, furthermore, we are considering legal action against Carol Morrison for making false reports to Child Protective Services. After a long silence, Principal Hamilton finally let out a deep sigh. I understand. We will begin an investigation immediately. Mr. Collins will be temporarily removed from teaching, and Mrs. Morrison's position as a board member will be reconsidered. Thank you, Judith said. What we want is an environment where all children can learn safely. Not just for Amy, but for other children as well. Leaving the office, the two felt as if a great burden had been lifted. However, this was just the beginning. Next, let's take this evidence to Child Protective Services, Mark said. We need to expose Carol's false reporting. Judith nodded. And most importantly, we need to tell Amy the truth and let her know that she never has to be afraid again. When they returned home, Amy was waiting for them with a tense expression. How did it go? She asked in a small voice. Judith embraced her daughter. It's okay, Amy. The school will be on our side now. No one can hurt you anymore. Tears welled up in Amy's eyes, but they were tears of relief. For the first time, she could truly feel safe. And she felt no hesitation in calling Judith Mom. 1 month later, on an afternoon at Oak Ridge Academy, a new atmosphere pervaded the school grounds. Anti-bullying posters were displayed throughout the school, and workshops were regularly held in classrooms. Judith parked her car at the school gate, waiting to pick up Amy. Unlike before, Amy came out chatting happily with a small group of friends. Her smile was brighter than anyone could have imagined just a few weeks ago. Mom. Amy jumped into the car and excitedly said, my science fair project passed the first round of judging. Congratulations, Amy. Judith said, genuinely pleased. Dad will be so happy too. On the way home, Amy talked about her new friends Sophia and Hannah. Sophia was good at science, and Hannah loved music. Both had previously kept their distance from Caitlin's group. The school's investigation results were swift. Mr. Collins was suspended and later resigned. Carol Morrison resigned from the board and, without ever apologizing, transferred Caitlin to another private school. Mark and Judith ultimately decided to drop legal action against her. They wanted to move forward. When they arrived home, Mark was working on his laptop in the living room. When Amy shared her science fair news, he hugged his daughter. This calls for a celebration. Mark said. Let's eat out tonight. How about your favorite Italian restaurant, Amy? During dinner, the three laughed and enjoyed their conversation. Everyone felt that the family bond had deepened since before. Having overcome difficulties together, especially the relationship between Amy and Judith had changed significantly. By the way, Mark said while eating dessert, I received a call from Principal Hamilton. They're looking for a volunteer coordinator for the school's anti-bullying program. She wondered if you might be interested, Judith. Judith looked at her husband in surprise. Me? A former nurse and a mother who stood up for children. Perfect choice, don't you think? Mark smiled. Amy nodded enthusiastically. You can definitely do it, Mom. Everyone would feel safe with you at school. Judith considered it thoughtfully. Well, it might be meaningful. That weekend, the local newspaper published an article titled, Oak Ridge Academy Introduces Comprehensive Anti-Bullying Program. Judith Watson's name was mentioned as the coordinator of the new program. 1 year later, in the spring, Oak Ridge Academy was holding its annual science fair. Many parents and students gathered in the schoolyard, with booths for various projects lined up. Judith was busy moving around as the volunteer coordinator, but she intended to be present for Amy's presentation. As she passed by a group of parents, a familiar name caught her ear. "Yes, about Carol Morrison," one mother was saying in a low voice. "Her daughter Caitlin caused trouble at the new school too, and now they can't find another school. I heard Carol divorced her husband as well." "She brought it upon herself," another mother replied. "She was so haughty, but in the end." Judith cleared her throat to interrupt the conversation and walked past with a smile. The past was the past. She was now looking forward and moving on. At the Science Fair Awards ceremony, when Amy's name was called for the first prize, Judith and Mark applauded louder than anyone. Amy went up on stage with a confident expression and received the trophy. "I conducted this research with gratitude to my family who supported me during difficult times," Amy said in a brief speech. "Especially to my mom and dad who always believed in me and protected me." Judith's eyes welled up with tears of emotion. It had been a while since Amy had started calling her mom without hesitation. A deep bond beyond blood ties had formed between them. On the way home, Amy sat in the back seat, gazing at her certificate with a peaceful smile. Mark took Judith's hand and said in a quiet voice, "We're really fortunate." Judith nodded. "Yes. Family isn't necessarily just about blood ties. It's bound by love and trust." Outside the window, the spring breeze was scattering cherry blossom petals. There would still be challenges ahead. But they were no longer afraid. Because they now knew they could overcome them together.